New Jersey Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill giving voice to what is undoubtedly a bounce-back moment for Democrats in New Jersey. What do I mean by that? Well, 4 years ago, Kamala Harris, as the Democratic nominee for president, underperformed Joe Biden by 400,000 votes. Tonight, Mikey Sherrill, the Democratic nominee for governor, wins easily, somewhat handily, somewhat surprisingly large, in a margin of victory over Jack Ciattarelli, the Republican nominee for governor. Weijia Jiang is with me, as with Robert Costa and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Weijia, we have a Truth Social post from President Trump regarding tonight's results.
We do, Major. It's the first time we have heard from the president since the Republican losses, and he is citing unnamed pollsters, saying, quote, Trump wasn't on the ballot and shutdown were the two reasons that Republicans lost elections tonight, which really falls in line with what I heard from Trump senior aides at the White House today, who said,
holy crap, you guys. What I'm about to show you is so completely insane that I had to read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't having some kind of fever dream. President Trump just went on Truth Social and made what might be the most delusional political prediction in modern American history. Are you ready for this? He's claiming that Republicans are going to win the 2026 midterms by record numbers. Yeah, you heard that right. Record numbers. This is the same guy whose handpicked candidate barely squeaked by in deep red Tennessee, whose party just got humiliated in North Carolina, and who's dealing with inflation that's making regular Americans want to scream. But Trump thinks Republicans are going to dominate 2026 like nothing we've ever seen before. Can you believe this? The level of disconnect from reality we're dealing with here is absolutely staggering. And it shows you just how completely out of touch Trump has become with what's actually happening in American politics right now. The timing of this prediction couldn't be more perfect because it comes at exactly the moment when Republicans should be panicking about their future prospects, not bragging about inevitable victories that exist only in Trump's imagination. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
look, off-cycle elections are what they are. We don't view this as a direct referendum on the president and his performance. They also suggested that perhaps Democrats were dragging out the shutdown because they're acknowledging that it is hurting Americans and could have harmed these races. But our exit polls, Major, tell a different story. In Virginia, when asked the question, was Trump a factor in your vote, 52% said yes. In New Jersey, same question, 51% said yes. In California, and we'll get to that.
We will.
We will. The answer was 58% yes, Trump was a factor. Now, in New York City, it was only 38% yes, 59% no. But whether he's directly on the ballot or not, he is there, right? Because people are thinking about his policies, especially I'm thinking about Virginia, which has a...
So let me break down exactly what Trump said, because this Truth Social rant is a masterpiece of political delusion. On November 29th, just days after Republicans barely held on to that Tennessee seat that should have been a 30-point blowout, Trump posted that Republicans are poised to win the midterms by record numbers. Record numbers. This is like watching the captain of the Titanic talk about how smooth the voyage is going while icebergs are literally crashing into the hull. The timing of this post is absolutely perfect because it came right after the Tennessee special election that had Republicans privately freaking out about their 2026 prospects. But instead of acknowledging reality, Trump decided to double down on fantasy and convince himself that a near disaster in deep red Tennessee somehow proves that Republicans are unstoppable. The man is literally living in an alternate universe where almost losing safe seats counts as evidence of future landslide victories, and his party is too scared to tell him he's completely wrong. This level of self-deception would be impressive if it wasn't so dangerous for every Republican candidate who's going to have to run in 2026 while their party leader is setting impossible expectations based on his complete misreading of political reality. But here's where this gets even more ridiculous, and this is the part that shows you how completely Trump has lost the plot. Just a few days after making this bold prediction about record victories, Trump went back on social media to dismiss the affordability crisis as a Democrat hoax. Yeah, that's right. While regular Americans are getting crushed by high prices for everything from groceries to housing, Trump is calling their struggles fake news. He's promising to roll back fuel standards to save money, as if that's going to magically fix the cost of living crisis that's making voters furious at whoever's in charge. Come on, are you kidding me? You can't solve inflation by tweeting about fuel standards, and you definitely can't win elections by telling voters that their financial struggles are imaginary. But Trump apparently thinks he can gaslight the entire American electorate into believing that everything is fine, and Republicans deserve to win by record margins. This approach to economic messaging is political suicide because it tells voters that their very real problems don't matter to the person who's supposed to be leading the country, and that kind of disconnect is exactly what destroys political coalitions and creates the conditions for massive electoral defeats. The reaction from Democrats has been absolutely brutal, and honestly, I don't blame them for mocking Trump's delusional prediction. When your political opponent is this disconnected from reality, why wouldn't you point it out? Democratic operatives are having a field day with Trump's record numbers comment because it makes him look completely out of touch with the warning signs that are flashing red all around him. They're using his own words to paint him as a guy who's so lost in his own ego that he can't see the political disaster building right underneath his feet. And the best part is that Trump gave them this ammunition completely voluntarily. Nobody forced him to make these ridiculous predictions. He just couldn't help himself from bragging about victories that haven't happened yet and probably never will. Democrats are already incorporating Trump's record numbers quote into their fundraising emails and campaign messaging, turning his overconfidence into a weapon that they can use to highlight his disconnection from reality and his party's actual vulnerabilities heading into what could be a very difficult midterm election for Republicans. But the most telling part of this whole story isn't what Trump said publicly. It's what GOP insiders are saying privately. According to Reuters, Republican operatives are warning that Trump's approval ratings could hurt midterm unity if inflation keeps hurting regular families. Think about that for a second. Trump's own party is worried that he's becoming a political liability, but he's out here predicting record victories like he's some kind of political genius. The disconnect between what Trump thinks is happening and what his own advisors know is actually happening shows you just how isolated he's become from reality. When your own team is worried about your political future and you're bragging about inevitable landslides, that's not confidence, that's delusion on a scale that would be funny if it wasn't so dangerous for the Republican Party. This internal Republican panic about Trump's political standing creates a fascinating dynamic where the party's public messaging about strength and confidence is completely contradicted by their private concerns about Trump dragging down their candidates and destroying their chances of maintaining power beyond his second term. USA Today and Politico are already spinning the Tennessee race as warning signs for Trump's agenda, and they're absolutely right to do so. When you almost lose a safe seat in a special election, that's not a sign of strength. That's a sign that your political coalition is falling apart. But Trump looked at those same results and somehow convinced himself that they prove Republicans are headed for historic victories. It's like looking at a house fire and concluding that your home insurance must be working perfectly. The man's ability to twist reality to fit his preferred narrative is honestly impressive in the worst possible way, and it's setting up Republicans for a rude awakening when reality finally catches up with Trump's fantasy world. This reality distortion creates a dangerous feedback loop where Trump's misinterpretation of warning signs leads him to make even bolder predictions, which in turn makes it harder for Republicans to have honest conversations about their actual political situation and the changes they need to make to remain competitive in a shifting electoral landscape. The timing of Trump's boast is also perfect because it came right after we've been seeing all these warning signs that Republicans are in serious trouble. The North Carolina Supreme Court disaster, the Tennessee near miss, rising inflation, cabinet scandals. All of these things should be making Trump more cautious about his party's prospects, not more confident. But instead of learning from these warning signs, Trump is doubling down on overconfidence and setting expectations that are impossible to meet. When Republicans inevitably underperform these ridiculous predictions, it's going to make their actual results look even worse and give Democrats even more ammunition to use against them. Trump isn't just predicting victory, he's setting up his own party for a humiliating failure that will be measured against his own impossible standards. This kind of expectation management is political malpractice on a level that's hard to comprehend because Trump is essentially guaranteeing that any normal midterm performance will look like a disaster for his party. Alright, so let me walk you through exactly why Trump's prediction is so completely disconnected from political reality, because when you look at the actual data and trends, it becomes obvious that he's either lying to himself or lying to his supporters about what's really happening in American politics. And honestly, the more you dig into the numbers and the context, the more clear it becomes that Trump is setting up Republicans for one of the biggest political disasters in modern history. This isn't just overconfidence. This is active self-sabotage on a scale that would be impressive if it wasn't so devastating for everyone involved. The gap between Trump's predictions and actual political reality is so massive that it suggests he's either completely lost touch with what's happening or he's deliberately misleading people about the true state of his party's prospects. Either way, the implications for Republican electoral strategy and candidate recruitment are absolutely devastating, because you can't build effective campaigns on foundations of fantasy and illusion. First off, let's talk about what the Tennessee special election actually tells us about Republican strength, because Trump's interpretation of those results is so wrong that it's almost impressive. Republicans held the seat, yeah, but they won by single digits in a district that Trump carried by over 20 points. That's not a sign of strength. That's a warning that your political coalition is collapsing. When you can barely win in deep red Tennessee, how are you supposed to hold competitive seats in purple districts? The Tennessee result should have been a wake-up call for Republicans, but Trump somehow looked at a near disaster and convinced himself it was proof of inevitable victory. This kind of reality distortion would be funny if it wasn't so dangerous for Republican candidates who are going to have to run in much more competitive districts, where Trump's delusions about party strength could get them destroyed at the ballot box. The fact that Trump can look at a race where his endorsed candidate massively underperformed and conclude that this proves Republicans are headed for record victories shows just how completely divorced he's become from any kind of objective analysis of political data or electoral trends. And let's talk about the timing of Trump's prediction, because it shows you just how completely he's lost the ability to read political momentum. He made this boast about record victories just days after Republicans almost lost a seat they should have won by 30 points. Normal politicians would look at that result and become more cautious about their party's prospects. But Trump did the exact opposite. He became more confident and started making even bigger claims about Republican dominance. This backwards relationship with political reality is exactly what you'd expect from someone who's so isolated from feedback that he can't tell the difference between warning signs and victory signals. It's like a football coach bragging about how his team is going to win the Super Bowl right after they barely beat a high school team in overtime. This inability to process negative information and adjust expectations accordingly is one of the most dangerous traits a political leader can have, because it prevents the kind of course corrections that are necessary to avoid electoral disasters and maintain competitive positioning in a changing political landscape. Now here's where Trump's economic messaging becomes a total disaster for Republicans, and this is the part that shows you how completely out of touch he is with what voters actually care about. While Americans are getting crushed by inflation and struggling to afford basic necessities, Trump is calling their financial struggles a Democrat hoax and promising to fix everything with fuel standard rollbacks. Come on, are you kidding me? That's not an economic policy. That's a Twitter rant disguised as a solution. Voters who are choosing between groceries and gas aren't going to be impressed by technical regulatory changes that might save them a few cents at the pump while their rent goes up by hundreds of dollars. Trump's approach to the affordability crisis shows that he has no idea what regular people are dealing with, and his tone-deaf responses are going to alienate exactly the voters Republicans need to win competitive elections. This disconnect between Trump's messaging and actual voter concerns creates a massive vulnerability that Democrats can exploit by positioning themselves as the party that actually understands and wants to address the problems that working families are facing in their daily lives. But the most damaging part of Trump's messaging isn't just that it's wrong, it's that it sets impossible expectations that will make Republican losses look even worse when they happen. By predicting record victories, Trump is essentially guaranteeing that any normal midterm result will look like a failure for his party. Even if Republicans hold most of their seats, it won't be enough to meet the standard Trump has set with his record numbers prediction. This is political malpractice on a level that's hard to comprehend, because Trump is basically handing Democrats a ready-made narrative about Republican failure, regardless of what actually happens in 2026. When you promise the moon and deliver anything less, you look like a failure even if you did reasonably well by normal standards. Trump's impossible predictions are creating a situation where Republicans will be judged not against reasonable expectations based on historical midterm patterns, but against the fantasy standards that Trump has created with his delusional boasting about record victories that have no basis in political reality or current electoral trends. The private concerns from GOP insiders make this whole situation even more absurd, because it shows that Trump's own team knows he's wrong, but they can't or won't tell him. Reuters reported that Republican operatives are worried about Trump's approval ratings hurting midterm unity, which is political speak for saying that Trump is becoming a liability for his own party. But instead of addressing these concerns or moderating his message, Trump is doubling down on overconfidence and making even bigger claims about inevitable victory. This disconnect between what Republican insiders know privately and what Trump says publicly creates a dangerous situation where the party's strategy is based on fantasy rather than reality. How are you supposed to run effective campaigns when your leader is living in an alternate universe, where almost losing safe seats counts as evidence of future landslides? This kind of strategic confusion is devastating for down-ballot candidates who need clear guidance about how to position themselves and what messages will actually resonate with voters in competitive districts. And let's talk about how this connects to the broader pattern of Republican struggles that Trump is refusing to acknowledge. The North Carolina Supreme Court disaster, the Tennessee near miss, declining poll numbers, economic frustration, all of these warning signs should be making Republicans more cautious about their midterm prospects. But Trump is doing the exact opposite, becoming more confident and making bigger predictions just as the evidence mounts that his party is in serious trouble. This pattern of escalating confidence in the face of mounting problems is exactly what you see from politicians who are completely isolated from reality and surrounded by people who won't tell them the truth about their political situation. It's a classic example of what happens when feedback loops break down and leaders stop receiving accurate information about their actual performance and standing with voters. This isolation from reality creates a dangerous spiral where bad decisions lead to worse results, which get misinterpreted as success, leading to even worse decisions and eventually to complete political collapse. The Democratic response to Trump's prediction has been perfect because they're using his own words to highlight how out of touch he's become. When your political opponent makes ridiculous claims that are obviously false, the smart move is to amplify those claims and let voters judge for themselves whether the person making them is living in reality. Democrats are already using Trump's record numbers prediction in their fundraising and messaging, painting him as a delusional leader who can't acknowledge problems or adapt to changing circumstances. This kind of messaging is devastating because it doesn't require Democrats to attack Trump directly. They can just quote him verbatim and let his own words prove their point about how disconnected he is from what's actually happening in American politics. The beauty of this approach is that it turns Trump's overconfidence into a weapon that can be used against Republican candidates across the country, as Democrats can point to his impossible predictions as evidence that the entire Republican Party is out of touch with reality and voter concerns. The media coverage of Trump's prediction has also been telling, because even outlets that are normally sympathetic to Republicans are treating his claims with skepticism. When political reporters start describing your victory predictions as overconfident or delusional, that's a sign that you've lost credibility with the people who cover politics for a living. Trump's relationship with political reality has become so tenuous that even friendly media can't pretend his predictions make sense, which creates a narrative problem that goes way beyond just this one social media post. If Trump can't convince political reporters that his party is strong, how is he going to convince voters who are dealing with real economic problems and looking for real solutions? This erosion of credibility with political media creates a feedback loop where Trump's increasingly disconnected statements receive more skeptical coverage, which reinforces the narrative that he's lost touch with reality and damages his ability to shape public opinion in favor of Republican candidates and policies. So let's break this down into the key points that everyone needs to understand, because Trump's delusional midterm prediction reveals way more about the state of Republican politics than just one crazy social media post. This is about a party leader who's completely lost touch with reality and the massive political consequences that are going to flow from that disconnect. When the person who's supposed to be leading your party can't accurately assess your political situation, it creates problems that go way beyond just bad messaging. It leads to strategic mistakes that can destroy your electoral prospects for years to come. Trump's record numbers prediction isn't just an isolated example of overconfidence. It's a symptom of much deeper problems with Republican leadership and decision-making that could have catastrophic consequences for the party's ability to remain competitive in American politics. Point number one, and this is absolutely critical, Trump's record numbers prediction shows that he's completely misreading the warning signs that are flashing red all around him. The Tennessee special election should have been a wake-up call for Republicans, but Trump somehow interpreted a near disaster as proof of inevitable victory. When you can barely win in deep red Tennessee, that's not a sign that you're headed for record victories. That's a sign that your political coalition is falling apart. And here's why this matters so much. If Trump can't accurately assess his party's political situation, he can't make good strategic decisions about where to focus resources or how to message to voters. Republican candidates are going to be stuck running campaigns based on Trump's fantasy version of their political strength rather than the reality of their actual vulnerabilities. This kind of strategic malpractice could cost Republicans winnable races all across the country, as candidates waste time and money trying to achieve impossible victories instead of focusing on the defensive campaigns they actually need to run to hold competitive seats. Come on. When your party leader thinks almost losing safe seats proves you're unstoppable, you've got a leadership problem that could destroy your electoral prospects. The inability to learn from warning signs and adjust strategy accordingly is one of the most dangerous traits a political leader can have, and Trump's response to the Tennessee results shows that he's completely lost this basic political skill. Point number 2, and this is where Trump's economic messaging becomes a total disaster. His dismissal of the affordability crisis as a Democrat hoax shows that he has no understanding of what voters actually care about. While Americans are struggling with high prices for everything from groceries to housing, Trump is calling their financial struggles fake news and promising to fix everything with fuel standard rollbacks. That's not an economic policy that addresses real problems. That's a Twitter rant that ignores the issues that are driving voter anger. And here's what makes this even worse. Trump's tone-deaf response to economic concerns is going to alienate exactly the suburban and working-class voters that Republicans need to win competitive elections. When people are choosing between groceries and gas, they're not going to be impressed by regulatory changes that might save them pennies while their major expenses keep going up. Trump's inability to take economic concerns seriously creates a massive opening for Democrats to position themselves as the party that actually understands and wants to address the problems that regular families are facing. This disconnect between Trump's messaging and voter concerns could be devastating for Republicans in districts where economic issues matter more than culture war talking points. The fact that Trump thinks he can dismiss real economic pain as fake news while promising record electoral victories shows just how completely disconnected he's become from the concerns of ordinary Americans. Point number 3, and this is where the political malpractice becomes obvious, Trump's impossible predictions are setting up Republicans for failure regardless of how they actually perform in 2026. By promising record victories, Trump has created a standard that no normal midterm result can meet, which means that even decent Republican performance will look like failure compared to his predictions. This is incredibly stupid politics, because it hands Democrats a ready-made narrative about Republican disappointment no matter what happens on election night. Even if Republicans hold most of their seats and limit their losses, it won't be enough to meet the record numbers standard that Trump has set, which will make their actual results look like a disaster. And here's what makes this even more damaging. Trump's overconfident predictions are being made, while GOP insiders are privately warning that his approval ratings could hurt Republican unity if economic problems persist. So, Trump is promising the moon, while his own team knows that he's becoming a political liability, which creates a situation where Republican candidates will be stuck defending impossible promises made by a leader who's dragging down their electoral prospects. This kind of expectation management failure could turn what might otherwise be normal midterm losses into a narrative disaster that permanently damages Trump's political brand and Republican electoral prospects for years to come. And point number 4, and this is the most important long-term issue, Trump's reality distortion is preventing Republicans from making the strategic adjustments they need to remain competitive in a changing political landscape. Instead of acknowledging the warning signs from Tennessee and North Carolina and adapting their approach accordingly, Republicans are being told by their leader that everything is fine and they're headed for historic victories. This prevents them from making necessary changes to their messaging, candidate recruitment, and campaign strategy that could help them minimize losses or even win some competitive races. When your party leader is living in a fantasy world, it becomes impossible to have honest conversations about what's working and what isn't, which means you can't fix problems before they become disasters. Trump's delusional confidence is essentially freezing Republicans in place at exactly the moment when they need to be adapting to new political realities and changing voter concerns. This strategic paralysis could be devastating in 2026 as Republican candidates find themselves running outdated campaigns based on Trump's false assumptions about their political strength rather than reality-based strategies that account for their actual vulnerabilities. The inability to adapt and evolve in response to changing political conditions is a death sentence for any political party, and Trump's reality distortion is preventing Republicans from making the kinds of strategic adjustments that could save them from electoral disaster. Now here's what comes next, and this is where it gets really important for everyone watching. Democrats are going to use Trump's own predictions against him throughout the entire 2026 cycle, constantly reminding voters about his claims of record victories while highlighting Republican struggles and failures. Meanwhile, Republican candidates are going to be stuck defending impossible promises made by a leader who's increasingly seen as out of touch with reality. We're already seeing Democratic fundraisers and activists using Trump's record numbers quote in their messaging, and that's only going to intensify as we get closer to the actual elections. Republican candidates in competitive districts are going to find themselves in the impossible position of either defending Trump's delusional predictions or breaking with their party leader, neither of which is a good option when you're trying to win swing voters. The choice for Republicans is becoming clearer by the day. Either they find a way to ground their party leader in reality, or they watch him drag their entire electoral operation into a fantasy world that ends in massive defeats. Trump's record numbers prediction isn't just bad messaging. It's a symptom of a much deeper problem with Republican leadership and strategic thinking. When your party is being led by someone who can't tell the difference between warning signs and victory signals, you're in trouble that goes way beyond just one election cycle. The countdown to Republican reckoning continues, and Trump's delusional predictions are just making the eventual crash landing that much more painful.